Hi everyone. This video will explain what we mean by the tools of music and all the different notation tools that we'll be learning in this first learning unit. You'll need some staff paper to practice the different things that I'll be showing you. And you can download that staff paper from the course document folder if you don't already have some. So go ahead and get some staff paper and then come on back and we'll start the presentation. What do you think we mean by the tools of music? Well, really what we're talking about here are specific symbols and techniques that you understand more about music. What basically composers use to write music. That's what this class is really all about. To have you become familiar with all the different tools that composers use. The first tools we're going to do and show you is the notation tools. And all these different notation tools we're going to be looking at. We're going to be looking at staff or staves, clefs, notes and rests, ledger lines, the grand staff, movable C clef, and bar lines. So we'll start with the staff. We use the staff or the stave to be able to write on our notes on the music. That's where we place the different notes according to whether it is on a space or a line. And there are 5 lines and 4 spaces for each one of these. The clefs tell us where the different notes belong in the range of things. So the first clef that we're going to be looking at is called the treble clef, or sometimes referred to as the G clef. And it looks like this. We also have the bass clef, or F clef, that looks like this. Now, briefly, the way that you would do this is to construct a treble clef is to go ahead and maybe just start with a line and do a little zigzagging around and then coming back under. There's a variety of different ways, but go ahead and try practicing a few of those with the treble clef. Notice on the bass clef that the bass clef starts on this line here, second to the top, kind of goes on a side little twirl there, and then has 2 dots next to it as well. So take a couple of minutes now and just practice some treble clefs and some bass clefs to get used to writing those on your staff paper. When you think of the treble clef, what voices and instruments use the treble clef? Let's start with the voices. What voices are used on the treble clef? All you vocal majors. Well, of course, the soprano and the alto. How about the instruments? What instruments are used on the treble clef? Well, the flute, the oboe, clarinet, saxophone, trumpet, French horn, violin, guitar, maybe even a few more that I haven't even included there. How about the bass clef? So if we have the soprano and alto on the treble clef, what is on the bass clef? What voices are on the bass clef? Well, you probably already know that. The tenor and the bass are going to be on there. But what about the instruments? What are all the different instruments? List the instruments that you think use the bass clef. Let's see if you come up with all the ones that I have right here. Bassoon, trombone, tuba, cello, string bass, bass guitar. There might even be a couple of others. So let's look at the notes. The notes are what we call our musical alphabet, and it's real easy to know these notes because they follow right along with the alphabet, starting with A. So we have A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and then it starts over again, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Now here's where following along on a piano keyboard may be helpful. So if you haven't already downloaded a piano keyboard from the course documents, you might want to do that, or maybe you have a keyboard handy that you can refer to, because this is really important to be able to see the different notes on the piano keyboard. Of course, if you have a guitar fretboard, that's good too. But the piano keyboard really gives us a clear idea of what we're going to be talking about, at least for this first unit of the tools of music. Now, when looking a little bit closer on the treble clef, we see that there are lines and spaces. There are 5 lines and there are 4 spaces. And the way to remember these is to actually count them from the bottom up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And they correspond to the letters E, G, B, D, and F. Now, there's some interesting sayings that you can maybe use to help you remember those, such as, every good boy does fine. Now, for the spaces, we also have 1, 2, 3, and 4 spaces on the staff. And those correspond to F, A, C, and E, which obviously spells face. Now, notice that our musical alphabet, starting again at A, follows right one after each other. A, B, C, D, E, F, G. We don't skip any lines or spaces. Space, line, space, line, and so forth. And then notice how it also goes on the opposite direction. So we have A, then G is a line, F is a space, E is a line, D is a space. And notice how it's even below the last line, the D, and the high G here is above the last line. So it does go beyond the regular lines of the staff. Now, a number of you may already know what ledger lines are, but for those of you that don't, what it is it's really an opportunity to extend the notes beyond what normally would be shown on the treble clef, or on the bass clef, as we will see in a little bit. So if you remember from the last one, we had a G on the top space right about here. Well, if we follow our musical alphabet, we'll go from G, then we'll have an A. Next one is a B, a C, D, and E. So 3 ledger lines up is where we have the D. Now I want you to particularly take a look at B and D. Notice that normally that would be on a space. In music, we don't add another line across the top here. So in the case of this note, the note B on the ledger line, above the ledger line, we just put it right on top of the ledger line, not with another line. We don't add another line above it, and we don't add another line above that D. And the reason for that is that the less black on the page, the easier it is to be able to read these different notes, because you need to be able to read these notes fairly fast. Then when looking, we also have ledger lines below the treble clef. So here is C on the first ledger line. Then the next space would be B, followed by A ledger line, followed by G is a space, followed by F is another ledger line. So again, ledger lines can be both below the staff and above the staff. The key here is that there is where middle C is, similar to where middle C is on the piano. Now let's take a look at the bass clef. And just like the treble clef, the bass clef has 5 lines. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it also has 4 spaces. And again, there's a way of being able to kind of remember these. First of all, the letter names for the 5 lines are G, B, D, F, and A, which kind of corresponds to good boys do fine always. And there's a couple of other sayings that maybe some of you may already have a couple of others that you know of. For the spaces, again, 1, 2, 3, 4, there's 4 spaces. and the letters on the spaces are A, C, E, and G. And again, it corresponds to a little saying of all cows eat grass, just as a way of being able to help you memorize these lines and spaces. And it's important to memorize both the treble and the bass clef and to become very, very familiar with them. Because it's not unusual to have students that primarily sing on the treble clef, such as the sopranos and the altos, or players that play, musicians that play instruments on the treble clef, like the trumpet or the clarinet or the flute, that really don't have much experience reading the notes on the bass clef. Or the same way with tenor and basses, or trombone players and tuba players that don't read many musical notes on the treble clef. But for a musician, it's important to be able to understand and be able to read fluently all the notes on both the treble and the bass clef. So here is an example of the notes on the bass clef. And if we start again with our A, B, C, D, E, F, G, all the way up, and notice how it's extending. Here's A again, A, B, C, D, E, F, and up, adding to the adding further on the staff with some ledger lines, as well as going below, A to the G, then the space, ledger line, D, and C. Again, it all follows very nicely into our musical alphabet. Some of you may have heard this term called the grand staff. And there's an example of what the grand staff looks like. And basically what a grand staff is that it combines both the treble clef staff and the bass clef staff into one large staff. And this is what generally piano players use, and harp players sometimes use this as well. Now, the important thing to remember about the grand staff is that our musical alphabet continues through. Notice that if I start here at A, B, C, we have C over there, we have C over here, which is basically the same note. And then we continue on, D, E, F, G, and so forth. The reason for this gap over here is to show that mainly right in the middle would be the same note, just so that you can be able to read the notes easier. So again, we have A, B, C, and then D, E, F, G. So if the C is there, that's showing it on the bass clef. The C here is showing it on the treble clef. So what are the components of the grand staff? Let's just look at those again. We have the treble clef, and you've been practicing a couple of those, hopefully. We have the bass clef, which looks like that with the two dots, which is also called the F clef. And the reason why it's called the F clef, now that you know the names of the lines, is notice that those two dots are on both the upper and lower part of the F line. So that's where that name came from, the F clef. We generally call it the bass clef. The treble clef also is sometimes referred to as the G clef, and the reason being is notice how that little curve kind of finishes off and outlines the second line here, which we now know is the G line. So we also on our grand staff also have a bar line. We also have a bracket. So combining all of that, this is what a grand staff looks like with the components. Go ahead and pause this recording and do some practicing of the grand staff right now. Now I'd like to talk again a little bit more about the ledger lines. I alluded to this before. Notice that this middle C, which is also referred to the middle C on your piano, is notated approximately the same distance from the treble clef from the bottom of the first line there. So there's middle C, but if that middle C is on the bass clef, it is the same approximate distance here. Now, if we look further down over here, we have an E. So we have C, D, E. So an E is on the second ledger line. But this E right here is the same pitch as that E. So for instance, here's middle C. And whether I play it on the treble clef or the bass clef, it's the same very note. It's just a matter if it would be easier to read on the treble clef or the bass clef. Now the E, which is right up here, here's the C, and then if I go to the E, which is right over here, this E, that is the same E on the treble clef as the first line. So both of these are the same pitches, just that they're written on two different staves. There, the treble and the bass. Another example is right here. Here that is again. Here's the C. So that C, D, E is the same as this written on the treble clef. What are bar lines? Those aren't the things that you stand waiting to get into one of the places on Whiskey Row. No, that's not a bar line. But what a bar line is it's a grand staff that divides the staff to make measures. And as you can see in the grand staff here, it shows, and obviously here's where the different music falls in between. And we'll be seeing more of this when we start talking about time signatures and those sort of things. Now, the next thing that probably a number of you have not become too familiar with is what is called a C clef. And the reason I'm going to spend some time on the C clef is that there's certain instruments that are quite unique. For instance, the viola, which is kind of the alto instrument in the string family, it has a very large range from a C way down here to an A way up there. Now that creates some real challenges for the composers, because where do you put the pitches? So what you see here is if the composer is writing a piece and they want to have the viola part put these notes and write it on the bass clef, look at all these ledger lines that they have to look at. Wow. That's not the easiest thing to be able to read those. Or if you say, okay, what about we'll put it in the treble clef. Maybe we'll make it easier to read on the treble clef. Well, you're again dealing with a lot of ledger lines below the staff. And so that's why we've really come to the idea of what this movable or relocated middle C clef is all about. So in this example, what we have is we have a low C with all those ledger lines, an F, a D, and an E. Now, if we have our movable C clef on here, and I'll talk more about what this really means, notice how we're able to eliminate a number of these ledger lines and make it a little bit easier to be able to read that way. So that's really the whole idea by using the C clef, is to eliminate some of these ranges that are way above or below the treble or bass clef. Now, all that you really have to remember for this class is that it's called the movable C clef, even though they do have specific names like the soprano clef, the mezzo-soprano clef, and the alto clef, and the tenor clef. But what you want to remember is that wherever the two half circles meet, see how this is kind of two half circles, and right here on this one, the two half circles meet on the first line. That's where the middle C note is. Now over here, the mezzo-soprano clef has the two half circles joined together on the second line. Again, that's middle C right there. In the alto clef, it's on the third line. And on the tenor clef, it's on the fourth line. So really, again, I just want to emphasize when making these C clefs, or when you go through and we have some assignments using the C clef, wherever the two half circles meet, that line, and it will always be on a line, it will never be on a space, that line will always be middle C. Now, I would suggest that you pause the recording and you complete the following assignments. What I'm wanting you to do is to, on assignment 1, which is in the course documents folder under the tools area, I have some exercises for you to practice naming the notes. Then there's assignment 2, which is reading the upper and lower ledger lines. So it gives you practice reading those lines. On assignment 3, you have more practice reading the inner ledger lines. So that's what I'd encourage you to do now before going on to the next part of this presentation. Now, let's look at notes and rests. The first note and rest that we're going to be looking at is what is called a double whole note and a double whole rest. You don't see many of these in here, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that, but it is possible to have a double whole note and a double whole rest. More commonly, though, you do see whole notes. And when we have just the note here, that is called the head of the note. Now, for the rest, what's interesting to note is that there is a line and then a little box that is kind of attached to the bottom, and this is important, to the bottom of the line. So it's kind of right in the space for the whole rest. For the half note and half rest, we have not only a head, but now we have this vertical line here, and it could be above or it could be below the note, called the stem. For the rest, we have, notice that there's the line, and then the box is right on top of the line. So again, just to make sure you understand, the whole rest, the box is below the line. On the half rest, the box is above the line. Then we have the quarter note and quarter rest. Again, very similar to the half note, but it's colored in, so that would be referred to as a quarter note. And the quarter rest looks somewhat similar to an M on its side, so when practicing those, rather than to get too fancy, all you have to think of is making an M that is kind of on its side there. There's such a thing as eighth notes, and the eighth note has a head, a stem, and it's added to as a flag. Now, the important thing about this is that the flag will always, 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 always be to the right of the stem. Don't put it to the left of the stem. It will always be to the right of the stem. And notice that the eighth rest is like a half of a percentage sign, something that looks something like that, without the little extra dot. There's such a thing as a 16th note. That notice there's two flags on it. There's, believe it or not, a 32nd note with 3 flags and 3 little curlicues there. There could even be a 64th note. You don't see many of those, but they are possible. They are possible. Now let's go ahead and talk about accidentals and semitones, or what we've referred to as half steps. What's kind of interesting is that accidentals are really a misdemeanor in that they don't, the composers don't consider them to be an accident. They had it all intended for them to be used in music. But anyways, that's what they're called. They're called accidentals. And there's basically 5 of them. There's what is referred to as the sharp with a sharp sign, the flat sign, the double sharp. There's the sign for the double sharp, not 2 sharps together, but an X, and a double flat with 2 flats, and then a natural sign that kind of looks like an L7, At least that's kind of the, whoops, let me just go back to that real quick. Here it is. Yeah, that L7 kind of looks like there's an L and then a 7 above it. That's how you would make the natural sign. Now, it's important for the placement of these notes is that notice it is always in front of the note. Always in front of the note. And also, it's as large as the head of the note. So whether it's on a space or a line, it's right in front of it, right directly next to it. Now, in most cases, because nowadays we use computer notation programs, we don't have to worry about these. But in a pinch, for instance, if you're on a gig or if you have to write something out by hand for somebody, it's important to be able to be exact as to where these notes and where the accidentals fall. Otherwise, the people are not going to be clear on what note you actually want them to play or sing. So go ahead and just practice a couple of these. Draw some notes on your treble clef and the bass clef and some ledger lines. And get used to writing the different accidentals. Sharp, flat, double sharp. And again, get used to writing them large enough, not too large and also not too small, about the same size as the note head. The next area we're going to cover is what are called half steps. And a half step in our culture, in our Western civilization, is the shortest interval between two pitches. And so on this diagram, what we have here is an example of where I have notated here an A. So here is an A. And on the piano, if you go from the white key to the black key, that's a half step. And if I play them both together, it sounds like that. So that's a half step above. Now if you go from the A to the black key to your left or below, and again if I play them together, so that's an example of a half step. Now what's also interesting about the piano keyboard is that there are two other places on the piano keyboard between the two white keys of E and F and B and C that also are considered half steps. So here's E and F. And here's B and C. So those are also half steps. So let's talk again and associate these half steps with sharps and flats. So on the piano here, on the piano keyboard, notice that this note between the two black keys is what is referred to as the letter D. And so when I go up to my right, ascending, we have a D. That would be a D sharp. Now if I go down to my left, actually I played an A, I should play a D. Here's a D. There's a D. So there's a D sharp, or an octave higher. D, D sharp, D, D flat. Now the same thing applies to another kind of term that we're going to be looking at, and it's referred to as ENHARMONICS, and it's a Latin term that means the same. So what I have is a diagram here. I have a black key right in the middle of the three black keys. Right in the middle there is that note. And if we follow along with our musical alphabet, the note right to the left of it is a G. And if I'm going up, if I'm going ascending, that black key would be a G sharp. If I'm going down, there's the A, here's the A. And if I'm descending, that black key would be named an A flat. And so this G sharp, here's an example of this on the treble clef, this G sharp can also have the name of A flat. So every pitch actually can have a couple of different names to it. Now, double sharps and double flats, something you don't see a lot of, but you will see those in music. And it's nothing unusual except that we're just doubling the distance between it. Let's just take again a look at how they are written. For a double sharp, you have an X, not two sharps. I just want to remind you of it. When writing a double sharp, you do not have two sharps, you have an X. Or a double flat with two flats. That case, you do have two flats on it. All right, so identify, this is our first class assignment, and I'd like you to go ahead and write these out on the paper to give you some practice with writing enharmonic notes. I'll kind of go through this first one for you. What I'm asking you to do is identify the note and then construct and name the enharmonic. So you look at this first note right over here and you say, okay, that is a D sharp. So you write D sharp on the line there. Then you say that D sharp, and I find it on my piano keyboard. And I notice that, oh, that's a black key. That black key can not only be called D sharp, but it can also be called E flat. So what you'd write right over here is the E, and you'd add a flat to it, and then you'd go ahead and put down right next to it the letter E flat. Now here's important. Notice that when we read music, the sharp is always in front. So we say D sharp or E flat. But when writing it on the staff here, it's just opposite. We don't do sharp D. We don't have the sharp in front of it and the D, and then the flat in front of it, the D. No, we just have the sharp beforehand, but when we spell it on a paper, we have it afterwards. So go ahead and pause the recording now and complete this assignment. Here's the answers. How'd you do? A sharp is the same as B flat. F flat is the same as E. G flat is the same as B. F sharp the same as G flat. Here's an interesting one. Did you get this one? G double flat. G double flat is the same as F. G, so we have G, and then G flat, 1 half step, and then 2 half steps to the F. Or in the case of this one, B double sharp is the same as C sharp. So we go from B to B sharp, which would be C, and then C sharp. And then how about the same one here? F double flat to E flat. In case you got a little confused with that, let's look at that a little bit closer. Notice that the double sharps and double flats we have here is where there's a G, and then if we go a half step and then another half step, this F would be also named G double flat. Even though it's an F, we could also call it a G double flat. Or for instance, this A here could also be called G double sharp. G, G sharp, G double sharp. So that's kind of another example of how double sharps are used and double flats are used. Here again is we have E and F. What about when there isn't a black key in between? E and F and B and C. Let's take a look at this. So here is, for instance, if we have an F double flat, F double flat. So here's F. So here's F. We then go to E, and then we go to, so there's our half steps. So it's 2 half steps, 1, 2. So an F double flat is the same as E flat. Or an E double sharp is the same as F sharp. So let's take a look at that. Here's E, and then if we go 1 half step, it would just be plain F. And then if we go another half step up to this black key, it would be F sharp. So an E double sharp is the same as an F sharp. Here's another example. C double flat is the same as B flat. So here's C, and then you go down 1 to the B, another half step to the B flat. Or B double sharp is the same as C sharp. So here's B, a half step up is C, and a half step above that is C sharp. One more. A double sharp is B. Now this is actually an easy one because we don't have to worry about those places that don't have a black key in between it. And so an A double sharp is the same again as 2 half steps above. So here's the A right over here. And then you go up a half step to the black key to the B. So A double sharp is the same as B. If you have trouble with those double sharps and double flats and the enharmonic, don't hesitate to send me an email or a tweet or something like that, and I'll try to spend more time in explaining that for you. The next area is the natural sign. And you see natural signs periodically in music. And what it does is I like to use the term restore rather than cancels out or so forth. Because, for instance, we may have a G sharp in a piece of music, and the composer says, I'm done with that G sharp. I want to bring it back to a G natural. And so I'm going from the G sharp to the G natural. Or there may be a G flat, and I'm done with that G flat, and I want to go to a G natural. So that's what the use of the natural sign is all about. Now, this next area has to do with what we refer to as chromatic and diatonic half steps. The important thing to remember about the chromatic half step is that the letter stays the same. Say that to yourself. The letter stays the same. So we have a half step here, but notice that we have an E to an E sharp. Notice that the E is the same. We have an E, and then I'm going a half step up, which actually, if you look at it on the piano, would be the same as an F, but we don't call it an F. We call it an E sharp because we're talking with a chromatic half step. Or, for instance, we have an A, or A flat, I should say, A flat, and if we want to go above the A flat to a half step, we would have again the same letter A, but in this case to an A natural. So A flat to an A natural, or a C to a C sharp. Again, the thing to remember about the chromatic half step is that it's the same letter, Now that's not the case with the diatonic half step. The diatonic half step is different letters. So the same example that we had up here, where we went from the E and we went a half step up, or a G sharp, from a G sharp to an A, or from a C to a D flat. And I'm actually playing these down an octave, but I think you get the idea of it. Okay, here's another in-class assignment for you to work through. I want you to construct a chromatic half step above the given note. So the given note here is an E. I want you to construct a half step above that E. And then I want you to look at here, chromatic is a B, and again remember chromatic is the same note. So take a couple of minutes and complete that. You might have to pause the tape here. Here's the answer. How'd you do? E to an E sharp, B to a B sharp, an F sharp to an F double sharp, and then a D flat to a D natural. Did you get them all right? Here's another one. Construct a diatonic half step above the given note. So again, remember diatonic half step above is a different letter, not the same letter name. So we have a E and a diatonic half step, B, different letter. So a E would have to be some form of an F, the B would have to be some form of a C, and so forth. Stop the recording and go ahead and complete those. How'd you do? Here's the answers. E to F, B to C, F sharp to G sharp. How about this one? D flat to E double flat. That's a little trickier one. So look at D flat, find that on the keyboard, and we're going above, which actually would be the D flat would actually be going up to a regular D. But we can't call it a regular D because it has to be a different name, so we have to call it an E double flat to be able to make that enharmonic idea with, again, the half step. Here's another class assignment. Construct a chromatic half step below the given note. And the answer, did you get this one right? Where there's D flat and then D double flat. Chromatic, again, the same letter. Has to be the same letter. Another one. Now construct a diatonic half step below these given notes. Diatonic, again, remember, is a different letter. So we have E has to be some form of a D, B has to be some form of an A. Go ahead and stop the recording and complete that. And the answer is these. Did you get this one? F sharp to an E sharp. Because again, it has to be a different letter name for diatonic. F sharp to E sharp. Now, we know that E sharp is the same as F, but we have to call it by an E sharp. Now, the same concept applies to chromatic and diatonic whole steps. And again, remember, a whole step is the same as 2 half steps. So what I'm going to be asking you to do is to construct a chromatic whole step above these different notes. Now these are actually pretty easy because again, remember, the chromatic means that it's the same letter. So we have an E and we want to go up to a whole step. So we have an E, and so therefore we have E. And I'll give you the answer for this first one. This first one's going to be an E double sharp. Go ahead and complete the rest of these. And here's the answer. E, E double sharp, B, B double sharp, F, F double sharp. Now here's a tricky one. How about that? A flat to A sharp. Again, it's got to be the same thing. So we have A flat. 1 half step would be A. And then the next half step would be the black key, A sharp. Did you get that one right? One more. Construct a chromatic whole step below the given note. So again, the same letter. So we have an E. And again, these are relatively simple and logical, because if we're going from E, that E is going to be a double flat. Go ahead and stop the recording and finish these. And here's the answer. E to E double flat, B to B double flat, F to F double flat. How about this one? D sharp to D flat. Let's take a look at that. D sharp is a black key. Because we're going below, the next 1 half step would just be a plain D. And then the next half step would be a black key. And we have to call it D flat. Now, the next thing we're going to be looking at is what is referred to as the chromatic scale. Now, the chromatic scale is different than chromatic half steps in only one slight variation. As you can see on the treble clef here, this chromatic scale follows exactly as the piano keyboard. What's not showing up are the different notes here, but if I start here at the C, right, whoops, if I start right back at that C, and I go to the black key, C sharp, then the D, then the D sharp, then the E. Now notice how that corresponds right up here. Now I don't write an E sharp because I'm following exactly as the piano. So I got the E and I go directly to the F. Then the F sharp, then the G, G sharp, A sharp, B, and then I'm back to C. And again, notice I don't have a B sharp, I have a B going to the C. Now, descending is very similar. I'm going to start on C, and instead of going to a C flat because of the piano keyboard, I go directly to B. To the B, then the B flat, to the A, to the A flat, to the G flat, to to the F. Then here we go again. We don't do an F flat, we do just a plain E to an E flat, to a D, to a D flat, and finally we're back to C. Here's an example of a chromatic scale starting on the note D. And again we start with D, and then going up D, D sharp, E, F. Again, we don't call it E sharp, we go right to F. So again, D, D sharp, E, F. Then we go to the G, F sharp. Then the G, G sharp, A sharp, B, and again, not a B sharp, but we go right to C, then to the C sharp, and then to the D. And then if we want to come down on that D chromatic scale, we're on the D, then the D flat, C, to the B flat, to the A flat, to the G flat, to the F, directly to the E flat, D flat, right here, and then to the C. Okay, there's two other assignments that I want you to complete for this unit. Assignment 4 gives you practice with enharmonic notes and the chromatic scale. So that's what that assignment is all about. And then assignment 5 gives you practice with chromatic and diatonic steps, both half steps and whole steps. And go through this lecture again if any of those areas are giving you any trouble, or don't hesitate to contact me, and I'll certainly try to help you with this. So to conclude this area, one of the things that we want to understand is that this idea of tools of music are these notes and symbols and rests and all the things that composers use to write the music that we hear. I'm asking you to complete the assignments before taking the test, and you'll find all of those right online. And for the exam, just to give you a heads up, you will have to be able to name the notes on the staff. You'll need to be able to construct a chromatic scale or identify a chromatic scale. You'll also need to identify and construct enharmonic pitches, and also be able to construct half and whole steps above and below any given note. If you have any questions, again, don't hesitate to contact me, and I'll be more than happy to help you out. Thank you.